Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 600, the First Quebec Conference. Last time, while slow progress was made against the Germans' outer defensive line, thanks to the likes of Tweedy, Major John Buchan, 2nd Baron Tweedsmuir, who helped take the towns of Leonforte and Osoro, the Americans were still pushing north just west of this line that curved around Mount Etna. But given that Mussolini had fallen from power and holding Sicily was untenable, Hitler decided to evacuate his German troops from the island. Now the race was on. Could the Allies shut down Messina before the Axis used the port city to make good their escape? But as challenging as any retreat is, it's doubly so when it's an amphibious one. Just ask the British. The word most associated with Dunkirk is miracle. Well, now the Germans needed their own miracle. Fortunately, they had two very competent men in place to make this happen. The first was Sea Transport Leader Messina Strait, Commander Gustav von Liebenstein. He had been at this post since the end of May and had worked miracles of his own since that time. Upon his appointment, there was one port at Messina being used and two on the Italian mainland for the transfer of troops. Now, by mid-July, there were 12 routes for the ferries to take. On that note, the ships for this process had been acting independently. Well, no more. They all answered to von Liebenstein now. He also improved the docks on each side and the roads that led to each dock, again on both sides. The result, when his men transferred the Hermann Goering Division to Sicily of 610 vehicles, 750 tons of supplies, and 3,600 men, all were brought over in one day. This was only possible as he brought all the Luftwaffe and Army engineers together under him. Inefficiency made Liebenstein's eyes cross. Well, there would be none of that on his watch. The second man vital to a successful retreat was Colonel Ernst Gunther Bode, now Commandant Messina Strait. It was to be his job to shield Messina Strait from the enemy, and if you were impressed by Liebenstein, prepare to be entertained by Bode. Before World War II, he had been an international show jumper, horses, that is, and in 1942 he was sent to Rommel's Africa Corps. Taking on the enemy, he would enter battle in a kilt and carry a claymore, a double-edged broadsword. And using his fluency in English, whenever retreating from battle, he would get on the radio using the British frequencies and tell them to stop firing. Why? Because they may hit him, and who would want to live in a world that he was not in? His men loved him as he led from the front with his claymore, but in regards to Messina, his ability to organize matched his battle dress and confidence in retreat. Bode, like Liebenstein, got to work. First, he had 6 AA sectors set up, 3 on each side of the strait. On the Italian mainland side, there were 82 heavy and 60 light AA guns. On Sicily, 41 heavy and 52 light guns. Next, he had 150 3- and 4-inch guns along the shorelines. They could attack enemy ships or aircraft. And if enemy naval vessels came too close, Bode had 4 batteries of 280 millimeter, 2 152 millimeter, and 1 170 millimeter guns set up. And waiting for the troops once they reached Messina, Bode had piled up food, cigarettes, and brandy. Morale was important, as this war was far beyond just reaching the Italian boot. On August 2nd, 1943, Bode told Kesselring, "We are ready." Kesselring passed this on to the OKW, the German Armed Forces High Command, that answered directly to Hitler. First, the men would be ferried, then equipment, then supplies. And though General Hoob, in command on Sicily, was doubtful this would work, von Liebenstein told him that, "I can ferry 12,500 men every day across with their equipment." Still, General Hoob could only hope that this was not the transport leader being a braggadocio. On the other side of the chessboard, the Allies were also planning for the future. Clearly, unless some German miracle or Allied disaster occurred, Sicily was going to be lost. It was just a matter of time and casualties to endure. No, the question in Washington and London was, what comes next? To answer that, Churchill, as he told C&C Alexander, would travel across the Atlantic to discuss the issue, and others, with FDR. The Prime Minister told the C&C that he was going to attempt to convince the President that Italy proper should be next. After all, it was right there, and it would put the Allies on the mainland, even if farthest from Berlin. But also, to the Prime Minister, being British, the Mediterranean was vital, and no doubt to the C&C, also being British, would agree with that. Churchill finished his message to Alexander with, if he, the Prime Minister, was successful, the details of crossing over would be left up to him, the C&C, and to Eisenhower. Alexander replied to this by giving an up-to-date progress report on the fighting on Sicily, then moved on from there, getting to Churchill's desire to take the war to Italy proper. First, there was the rather obvious crossing the Strait of Messina, as it was just under 3 miles distant, followed by 2 other plans. Basically, to land at Reggio di Calabria via Operation Buttress, or to swing around the foot of Italy and land at the unexpected town of Cotrone via Operation Goblet. The latter, though further away and further up Italy's east coast, would have the added benefit of isolating all those German troops that had just left Sicily from defending Rome. Alexander continued. As for the remaining war of Sicily, as the Allies were trying to minimize their own casualties while ending this particular battle soonest, that was really now the purview of the Allied air forces, which was gearing up. Now that the Allies had possession of the airfields of southern Sicily, there was more room left on Malta for British and American bombers, like the Baltimore and Boston bombers. The Baltimore, an American light bomber, had been ordered by the French originally, but once they were out of the war, it went to the British, who appreciated its improvements over the Bristol Blenheim and was used most exclusively in the Mediterranean theater. The American Douglas Boston light bomber had also been ordered by the French. It too was used by the British, who gave it the service name Boston. But after 1941, it was also referred to as the Havoc. Just over 7,000 of these would be built during the war, with 1/3 of them going to the Soviet Union. From Malta, it was a relatively short flight to bomb Sicily, which is what the Americans did during the day, using Fortresses, Mitchells, Marauders, and Bostons, also from North Africa, while the RAF did their part at night with Wellingtons, Bostons, Baltimores, and a sprinkle of USAAF Mitchells. Having such a plethora of bombers on that side of the Atlantic, the Italian mainland was hit as well, with 500 sorties by Fortresses and other smaller bombers from North Africa, and 337 sorties by Avro Lancaster heavy bombers, or Lancs, from the UK proper, targeting northern Italy. Sicily may have been the recipient of more bomb runs, but the ones coming from the UK, targeting northern Italy, they carried a bigger payload. For the Italian people, the bombings were practically non-stop, as airfields, roads, and rail lines were targeted, with industrial attacks thrown in as well. And the attacks ranged from Sicily, Messina, Catania, Palermo, Rodazzo, but also future targets such as in and around Rome. As for the marshalling yards of Rome, they were just too vital to let go. RAF bombers would drop leaflets the night before, giving a warning to the citizens, and the actual attacks themselves were carefully, painstakingly worked out to minimize collateral damage, not to mention historical, cultural, and religious sites. The rail lines of Naples, in between the Italian toe and Rome, were also targeted. Mussolini's famous on-time trains were now a thing of the past. As for the Axis Air Force's response to all of this, that amounted to little. Besides the air attacks against Allied shipping and the landing sites early on, soon the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica lacked adequate ground support to launch meaningful counter-air raids. Failure, like success, builds on itself. And for Italy, like Germany, these constant air raids would become the new reality. But back to the future, or rather the future war, once Sicily fell. FDR and Churchill met in Quebec City, hosted by the Canadian Prime Minister William King. The meeting went from August 14th to the 24th, and many topics were covered. It was Churchill who suggested that the Canadian Prime Minister be involved with the talks, but FDR politely said no. It would lead to China, Brazil, and other dominions wanting a seat at the table as well. So the compromise was that King would host this conference, but it would be mostly ceremonial. Again, many topics needed to be covered, and the reams of paper prepared and produced by the First Quebec Conference were enough to build a bomb shelter. Thus, an overview will suffice here. Obviously, the future invasion of France had to be discussed. This war was only going to end with Allied troops standing in Berlin. For now, the target date for Overlord, as it was being designated, was May 1st, 1944. Yet Overlord was not the only suggested operation to represent the beginning of the end for the Pact of Steel. Operation Jupiter, the invasion of northern Norway and Finland, this idea had been around since 1941, but it would be eventually shelved, despite Churchill pushing for it for years. Next, Churchill pushed to keep operations in the Mediterranean going. The invasion of Italy was discussed, with a view to removing Italy from the war. However, both FDR and Churchill would make it clear that if Rome wanted to give up, it had to be an unconditional surrender. And while at the Quebec Conference, word came of Sicily's fall to the Allies. With that being the case, the invasion of Italy was a go, to commence on September 3rd. That same day, an armistice would be signed officially, taking Italy out of the war, but Berlin and all those German troops in Italy would negate this piece of paper. Italy would still have to be fought over. Still, it had to be a heart-lifting moment for the Allies, for the world, when Major General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, signed the armistice of Cassabile, which had been approved by King Victor Emmanuel and Marshal Pietro Badoglio, the new Italian prime minister. Though this was not made public until September 8th, 5 days after Allied troops landed on mainland Italy. Perhaps this horrible nightmare would eventually end one day. Considering the Allied casualties expected from an invasion of Italy, not to mention northern France, not to mention the Japanese islands, work would continue on the atomic bomb. This was also decided at Quebec. Here, Canada was more included in the talks as it provided much of the uranium and heavy water, both needed in building the bomb that all hoped would end the war. It was also established, as touching the bomb, that it would never be used against one another, nor would it be used without the consent of the other, that being the United States and the United Kingdom. As there had been and would be further talks of invading the Balkans at Quebec, it was decided here to supply guerrillas with weapons in this region versus landing Allied troops there. As for Japan, to fall after Europe was liberated, the Allied Pacific forces would focus on cutting Japanese communications and supply lines, and to establish forward positions for the day that the Japanese mainland islands could be attacked directly. As for the question of Palestine, nothing official was decided, though the Allied leaders knew of the events that we call the Holocaust, and that Zionist leaders wanted the support of the Allies for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Back to the Pacific, the Japanese hold on Rabaul on the island of New Britain at the top of the Solomon Islands was complete, with tens of thousands of troops there, not to mention air and naval power. Instead of taking this on directly, it was decided to bypass and isolate this enemy stronghold, which dovetailed with MacArthur's Operation Cartwheel, turning the isolated military bastion into a de facto prison camp, as these men would soon be unable to leave there. When the U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull and British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden met, they were of one mind in not carving Germany into sections, each controlled by an allied power. But here the forces of history and the desire of revenge, not to mention the fear of a future Germany that stayed united, would win out. And lastly, considering this meeting covered subjects from invading northern France to the atomic bomb, this next little historical nugget seems ready-made for the what-if section of history. One Sergeant Major Émile Couture of the Canadian Army was given the task of cleaning the offices afterward, where the meetings were held. And in doing so, this 25-year-old soon found a leather portfolio with a gold inscription, which read, Churchill, Roosevelt, Quebec Conference, 1943. Being 25, the young man probably thought the 1943 version of cool and kept it as a souvenir. But inside of it, why he did not check right away is another question, was the complete plans for Operation Overlord. But later that day, he did look inside and, seeing the documents, then thought the 1943 version of, oh crap, which was probably mon Dieu, or more like, oh shit. As it was late in the day, he hid the portfolio under his mattress and returned it to the proper authorities the next morning. Of course, investigators from Scotland Yard and the FBI gave the young Couture a thorough rectal examination, but finding nothing untoward as to intent or action taken by him, the young man would be awarded the British Empire Medal for his silence on the matter at the Second Quebec Conference in 1944. The medal was given for services rendered, or rather, in this case, for what he did not do. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I just realized as I was recording this, it's episode 600. Yay! But to be honest with you, because of the winter storm, I have literally, and I can show you video, been out there. I have a driveway that's about 75 yards long, about 3/4 of a football or soccer field. Anyways, so I go out there about an hour and a half every day, and it's ice. It's not snow. It's frozen because we haven't gotten above freezing yet. So I'm literally chipping away at ice because I have a wife and 2 daughters who drive, and they don't want to have to park so far away. So I'm chipping away. So the point is, I've been so focused on the ice, I forgot to do something special for episode 600. So I hope this is good enough. So I'm having a lot of fun because there's a lot I did not know about Sicily. So I'm enjoying this a lot. And obviously, as you can tell, it's getting near the end. But anyways, so yeah. Here's episode 600. I hope you enjoyed it. Anyways, I'd like to move on from that now. I'm so sore. I'm not moving on. Yeah, everything hurts. I'm 59 years old, and ice is heavy, and ouch, everything hurts. Anyway, so moving on. Sorry. I would like to thank Vernon Nosal, who lives somewhere in the UK. I couldn't find a city, who recently became a member. Thank you, Vernon. I hope you enjoy the episodes. I would like to thank Vinny T for giving me the proper pronunciation of Calabria and Catania, which I was butchering. Not that I won't butcher them in the future, Vinny. So let's not make promises we can't keep, okay? But anyway, I do appreciate the email. I think he said in the email that his family had to get the hell out of there at one point. So I'm glad they got out. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you get to teach me the proper way to say these towns. And lastly, I would like to thank Stan Favre, who sent me an entire series on the Pacific War, because, we're getting close to switching back to that. I'm looking forward to the Battle of Midway, and there's some other things like Coral Sea and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to that. And I needed like a basic, a primer just like the timeline, so it makes sense to me. And he just sent me a box full of an entire series. So Stan, thank you very much. Stan, you are the man. So that's it from here, from Frozen, Central Virginia. Next week, not this week, next week we're supposed to get, I don't know if we're going to stay, but we're supposed to get above freezing. So it'll be I'll probably be done by then and I'll have a broken back, but we're going to get back to the land of the living at some point. But right now, when I did that series on Greenland, that was amazing for the members out there. I don't know how they live like that. I mean, I'm sure there's beauty. I'm sure there's majesty and all that, and seeing another human being once or twice a year. But as far as just the cold and the constant slipping and sliding and dangerous every time you walk and just everything, the cumulative effect of cold. I'm not nearly as tough as I think I am, but I think maybe some of you guessed that already. Anyways, take care, everyone.